This system is behaving very much like a cancer, a carcinogenic circuitry at the social level of life organization. You know, I'm saying this isn't a metaphor. This isn't imagery. So it isn't as if I'm having an organic metaphor that some people might understand it. Well, I'm seeing society as an organism. No, I'm seeing it as a social life organization. That means it isn't determined by genetic circuits. It's determined by ultimately value systems and social value systems, not individual value systems. They're usually derivative from the social value system. At the social level of life organization, if you have a reproduction circuit that's growing, and it's growing exponentially, once you see exponential growth, you see carcinogenic possibility. There's something gone wrong. And it appropriates ever more of the life host nutriments for its own growth, and then it unlimitedly multiplies its own non-productive demands of growth, and that's what they're always saying, we must have growth, we must have growth. It's just the cancer meta program has entered into the very command posts of the social system. And so then you have the needs and goods, therefore, of the life hosts are displaced at every level, whether your food is going, has carcinogenic components, or you're not managing any level of the climate reproduction system or whatever. What it does is repeat the money sequence reproduction and multiplication every time it faces a problem. Then it metastasizes across the life host, across borders, and so on, eventually exhausts by the deprivation and the dysfunction that exhausts the life host. And that's the stage we're in now.
The real inside job is, and has always been, capitalism. A free market surely sounds nice and egalitarian and promotes freedom, right? But it's nothing of the sort. As John Cassidy wrote about the banking crisis of 2008, which took place under this free market paradigm, the notion that free markets are rational, self-correcting mechanisms is an invention of the last 40 years. Even Alan Greenspan, who was the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, and one of the most capitalist institutions on earth, he had to reevaluate his stance on free markets. He said that he was simply wrong. The term free market might sound nice, but in actuality it's the freedom for certain people or businesses to diminish the freedom of others. It is the concept of businesses and people looking out for their own self-interest and maximizing profits at all costs, even if the costs include labor exploitation, pollution, climate destruction, and so on. And you know what? I don't care if the original intention of free markets is to do this or that. What matters is how it plays out in reality. I always refer to the quote by engineer Stafford Beer, who said, "Posse weed. The purpose of a system is what it does, not what it is meant to do." And frankly, it might sound controversial, but when we see the wars, climate destruction, and inequality we are facing as a global society, it should not be crazy to declare that the purpose of capitalism is to kill us all. And going by the definition, we have had nothing but a so-called free market for a very long time. Every country on this planet is capitalist. They have all had economies that are comprised of labor for income, private property laws, competition, and economic growth, which is needed for job creation. To think that Russia, North Korea, or China are communist countries is plain stupid and ignorant. All these nations operate in accordance with the structural rules of labor for income, competition, and private property. It's just that their governments have much more involvement in how their economies are governed. They are what I call state-governed capitalism. Therefore, again, and I must reiterate this, when we look at the destroyed world we see before us that is full of war, ecological collapse, poverty, inequality, and corruption, this is all a result of free market capitalism and not because of a lack of free market principles. Just look at the banking collapse of 2008. Deregulation of the banking industry is what has led to this disaster. And guess what? The free market absolutely hates government regulation, since limited government is a desired attribute of a capitalist system. In order to better understand why free markets are unstable and can never work, let us look at an analogy that Peter Joseph used in a lecture of his back in 2014. Imagine that corporations with their voracious appetite for profits are gangsters sitting in a room. And imagine that there is a gun in the center of the room on a table. we will label that gun as the government. Historically, one of the best and fastest ways for corporations to maximize profits without accountability has been to use the government for help. So politicians are bribed, aka lobbying, to promote policies that favor a certain industry, even if that means instituting horrible labor practices such as sweatshop slavery or removing laws that protect citizens from corporate pollution or other abusive practices. So the corporations or gangsters want to use that gun in the middle of the room to gain power over the people and to also beat the other gangsters in the room, their competition. The free market encourages this gangster behavior, and the modern and most aggressive version of capitalism is called neoliberalism. Neoliberalism states that the best thing we can do for society is for every single individual, not just corporations, but for every single person to pursue the maximization of their self-interest no matter the cost. And here we are at the present shitty situation, with corporate power stronger than ever before, with a government that is unaccountable to the people, and with corruption as high as ever before.
America to back up on its feet and once again fight for the proposition that we hold these truths to be self-evident. Sounds corny. Not a joke. Think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing. You know the thing.
American politics has become a shit show, a circus act of comedians prancing around pretending to know what the hell they're talking about or what the heck they're doing, while having no understanding of systems theory or what a viable economic system should be. Capitalism is not a viable economic system. This system needs constant regulation in order to keep itself together. It does not step in, control its destructive tendencies every few years. We must shift away from a system that demands arbitrary labor to sustain growth to a system that pursues resource abundance, efficiency, and the use of technology to directly deliver a high standard of living, as opposed to forcing society to use a fake proxy system, such as the market, to deliver that quality of life for just a few people. If we want to bring balance and stability to our world, it requires more than just regulating an insane and out-of-control system. There are no rules to war, and the free market is a war system. We need the world to come together and advocate for an entirely new economic system that is truly viable on a foundational level. What system, you say? We can call this a resource-based economy or a natural law economy, and this concept has been discussed for thousands of hours on numerous platforms that are foreign to most people. The Zeitgeist movement is an activist organization of which I am a moderator. We have had many hours of lectures on the TZM channel, the documentaries Zeitgeist Addendum, Zeitgeist Moving Forward, as well as the books TZM Defined and the New Human Rights Movement go into detail about such a new socioeconomic model. And I encourage you to check them out if you have made it this far in the video. I thank you very much for watching this video. Please share this with other people and let's advocate for a new economy, a real society, not one that is based on infinite growth, competition, and waste. And one final note, Kennedy said that free market capitalism is the most efficient system. Well, yeah, it is very efficient at cost efficiency or maximizing money profits for private individuals, but it has been horrible at everything else. The original Greek definition of economy is management of a household, hence the reduction of waste and the increase of resource efficiency. Pretty much the exact opposite of the capitalist system we are dealing with today. The greatest waste of potential is the waste of human potential. So let's try to bring about a world that maximizes human creativity, compassion, and dignity. The free market will never, ever allow that to happen. Truth is, the history of human conflict has been an interplay between ignorance and intellect, between emotion and logic. If there's a single crucial life lesson to be learned, it's that reason and not passion should guide our actions. Otherwise, we risk deluding ourselves and losing sight of what's important. Aristotle once said that anyone can be angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not easy. In other words, we have to know what path we want to walk, what battles to fight, and perhaps to be a little bit upset with ourselves in realizing the need for self-reflection. The kind of world we want to live in all depends on what type of culture we support with our ideas and values.
It's big structural, political, economic stuff. You know, what we're being told to do is change your cotton buds. And all these sort of pathetic micro-consumerist bollocks, which just isn't going to get us anywhere. Actually, everything we have to do is change the system. We have to overthrow this system, which is eating the planet, with perpetual growth. I mean, since when was GDP a sensible measure of human welfare? And yet everything that governments want to do is to try to boost GDP. We're bursting through all the environmental boundaries and screwing the planet already. You want to double it? Double all that? Double it again? Keep doubling it? It's madness. We've got to find a better way of measuring human welfare than perpetual growth. It turns out that through massive rewilding, ecological restoration, you can draw down a load of the carbon dioxide we've already produced. Huge amounts, allowing the forests to come back, the marshes to come back, the sea floor to recover from trawling and stuff. They draw down carbon dioxide and can take us a long way towards stopping climate breakdown at the same time as stopping ecological breakdown. There's time, but we can't do it by just pissing around at the margins of the problem. We've got to go straight to the heart of capitalism and overthrow it.
Any system that can be put to the test should be put to the test. What is the matrix? It's a value system disorder and a system of social control. As long as the system exists, humanity can never be truly free. True freedom is the uninhibited self-expression of the human mind to reach its full potential and to consider no final frontiers, no limits as to what we can question. We must stay emergent in our thinking and to welcome and celebrate change, not be afraid of it. The time has come for our intrinsic unification as a species, to shed the old patterns and superstitions that have held us back from finding our true place among the cosmos, and to create that which we can finally call civilization.
But anyway, I learned very early, this is the major technique, not to seek public approval. This will put you down right away. When you work for the approval of others, you sacrifice what you would call creativity. You sacrifice original thinking. And when I stopped looking for approval from others, I began to make tremendous progress. If you seek the approval of others, they force you back, as a rule, into the mold. Do you follow me? So stop seeking approval of others. But if others come to you with information, that's quite different.
They lied about everything. The 40 beheaded babies, the so-called unprovoked attack, the bombing of schools and hospitals. When you look into it, you see lies everywhere, again and again. They lie so much that you think they'd be good at it, but the colonial arrogance is to be expected. A fascistic ethno-state with genocidal intent, fully propped up by the governments of the West, and as the world watches this crime against humanity unfold, we must never forget about the inside job at play. But not the one that you think, rather the ideological trappings that perpetuate this insanity, and of a paralyzing structure that is at war with life itself. The case for system change has never been stronger than now. The real inside job is, and has always been, capitalism.
My question from the start was, something doesn't add up here. Unprovoked attack, all the politicians use the exact same words, an unprovoked attack, this unprovoked attack. And you know if they're repeating words like that, they're preparing themselves like insecure narcissists do for the thing that they're guilty of. So we know they provoked it. We know there's a larger context here, but my question is, was October 7th an inside job?
For the most surveyed area on the planet, right, Gaza, It's interesting how just for hours on end, nothing, no response was taken.
6 hours.
Yeah, 6 hours.
One of the bombshells for me was an interview that came out. One of the elderly hostages. She was basically saying, first of all, that they treated her very kindly. They met all her needs. It really completely flips the narrative on its head that these were brutal, savage, inhuman monsters.
To play advocate for the devil, the Hamas rapist regime.
What she said that really kicked, though, is that there was heavy crossfire between the IDF and the Hamas fighters, and that many of the deaths were caused by the IDF. It seems like they're like stormtroopers from Star Wars. Like, they can't hit shit. They can't hit anything but civilians. If they aren't aiming for civilians or trying to kill children, they're hitting them anyway because they don't care.
כולם נהרגו.
מהחילופי אש.
מחילופי אש, כלומר יכול להיות שגם זה מאש כוחותינו?
חד משמעית.
כן? אוי, זה נשמע כל כך רע.
The foundational mechanisms of the state of Israel in bed with the corporate entities and a fascistic right-wing government that's even more right-wing than Netanyahu. A lot of his members are more not right-wing than he is.
The pattern of empire is to take life with plausible deniability, and then when every other option is taken from them, just like Pearl Harbor, just like 9/11, just like all these conflicts, when violence erupts, they point the finger and they say, look how brutal they are. They're coming for us. They want to destroy us. They want to take us all over. They drum it up. They boil everybody's blood. They make every person feel like they are personally going to be murdered in their bed by the most brutal and violent people in the world. And they use this to justify their very craven resource grabs. I want to go back to Netanyahu, though. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. This is part of our strategy, to isolate the Palestinians in Gaza from the Palestinians in the West Bank. So,
I mean, yeah, obviously Hamas was created by Israel initially anyway. They're funded and helped the political, their entire thing.
We of course should condemn the organization of Hamas, the political corruption that is inevitable of this prison gang taking power over these people after every single peaceful alternative was stopped.
When they marched peacefully,
society that serves all life. You may think it's an impossible dream.
Will not change in a monetary system. That is, there'll be very little significant change. It's going to take the redesign of our culture, our values, and it has to be related to the carrying capacity of the earth, not some human opinion or some politician's notions of the way the world ought to be, or some religious notions of the conduct of human affairs. And that's what the Venus Project is about. The society that we're about to talk about is a society that is free of all the old superstitions, incarceration, prisons, police, cruelty, and law. All laws will disappear, and the professions will disappear that are no longer valid, such as stockbrokers, bankers, advertising, gone forever, because it's no longer relevant.
So yeah, ever since then, I've been part of the Zeitgeist movement, and I've been doing my best to do whatever I can to spread the message and, help other people be informed as to what we need to do as a society to be more sustainable.
This shit's got to go.
This is the work of Peter Joseph, founder of the Zeitgeist movement, who's been working tirelessly to expose mechanisms and logical fallacies in the monetary system for over a decade now. His distinct articulation and artful expressions have become the inspiration for global systems change with an emphasis on structuralism. I myself was forever influenced, thereafter leading me to devote my existence to materializing a post-scarcity world.
I think it's a good starting point to just say, like, well, what's wrong with capitalism?
Yeah, right. The main problem, as I see it, is the fact that we have outdated systems of economics, outdated political systems, outdated ideologies that are holding us back as a species collectively. And these ideologies were formed in a different time and age that were required perhaps for that age. Thousands of years ago is a different time than now. We didn't have the technology that could allow us to create an abundance for ourselves. So understanding how brutal the world was back then and that we lived in real scarcity, there was a need to have some sense of laws and regulation and work, like trade, right? The existence of trade, for people to trade resources with each other for survival. That's understandable. But the capitalist system that we have today is really it's not working anymore. It's showing its contradictions in many different ways. And so, yeah, the main problem is that we have a very outdated system of economics that's really not being discussed at all. And the profound impact it has on our culture and our personal lives and on every level, from the micro to the macro, is really not being realized to its full extent. And instead, there's all these other things that are being scapegoated as the problems of humanity. You know, oh, human nature is just bad. Human nature is greedy. People are lazy. Any alternative to capitalism is terrible, as we've seen throughout history, as they say. So there's a lot of mythology out there that's holding people back. And I think the main problem is a lack of information, a lack of awareness. So it really comes down to raising awareness as to the critical points, you know, of what society needs to go to. And yeah, so the important thing is educating people, really, you know, because there's no action to be really taken if people don't even know where they have to go to begin with.
If we react to this system as it is without understanding the true structure that moves it, and the true nature of this system that govern it, we're just going to end up beating our heads against the wall. We're just going to end up continuing this system without even realizing it. I mean, even people who are activists, who are leftists, who are, you know, not even to touch the ineffectiveness of the Democrats, you know, they claim that they are railing against this system, but they really are it in every single way, because they lack a true structural understanding of their own participation in this system and the system itself that's beyond them. And I mean, I think that goes so deeply into all of us. I mean, all of us have internalized this system to the bone. I mean, we grew up in it, we were cultured in it. And that's the whole point that people miss when they sort of make these arbitrary dualities between good people, bad people. Oh, these are the bad guys, the bad guys. It's not about good people and bad people. It's about everybody was conditioned into this system. They were born into this system, and it molded them into the way that they are. Jeff Bezos and all these billionaire villains, which are, you know, true Bond villain people that are sociopathic on a massive level, they were conditioned to be that way.
Hell yes.
They were brought up in a system that incentivized them at every turn to become that way. And I think that the reason so many people fall short of changing this system is because they don't actually touch on the real structure of it. They're just moving the face around. They're shifting the mask. They're not going deep. They're not going to the bone.
One of the best ways I've heard it summed up was operant conditioning essentially is what it is people are going to end up doing what their society, what their environment constitutes as best for themselves, essentially, you know, in their own self-interest. So if their environment, their society, their socioeconomic system tells them that selfishness, greed, hoarding, exploitation, all those mechanisms are in their own best self-interest, then the psychological, interpretation of operant conditioning just tells you that is essentially the way people are going to act if society presents those things as incentives, for individuals to do.
Yeah, for sure. On an individual human behavioral level, that's definitely true. And also, like, I guess when we talk about the broader perspective of structuralism and the Zeitgeist movement, understanding how parts of a system interact with each other to produce certain outcomes that can only be viewed when you view the system through the interactions of the different elements of that system. So capitalism, just modern intelligentsia and academics, everything in today's society, really, on a personal as well as institutional level, is looked at in a hyper-reductionist manner. We're all too isolated in our way of thinking, isolated in our approach, and we're not looking at how our system simply, when it's put into interaction with a dynamic, changing world, it just does not produce good outcomes over the long term. And you cannot achieve any kind of environmental sustainability. You cannot achieve any kind of social justice or social, equitability in this world when a system inherently, structurally produces certain outcomes. So like a system of debt, right? Creating debt, money, its actual value being debt itself. That kind of system is always going to create class antagonism and poor and the rich as a mathematical guarantee. It's not like, it's not based on morality, the meritocracy system of like, it's those who worked the hardest who got that, whatever they wanted. Yes, there's some truth to that, However, like Matt said, you can only behave so much outside of the conditioning of your society. And from what I see, the society that we have today, for the most part, highly disadvantages and disproportionately does not provide opportunity to most people to be able to actually make ends meet in a comfortable manner for themselves. So on that level, on the class antagonist level, no. Looking through a structuralist perspective, the solution for our problem would not be to, give people more money or create more jobs or, create more equality money-wise, sure, as a transition step, yes, but the mechanism that creates the inequality needs to be eliminated, and that is the entire edifice of monetary mechanics, market system, and all that. That needs to be addressed, and that's what structuralism really does. It gets to the core of the problem. Not to mention, lastly, like the environmental issues that we're having, that's the major problem. Climate change and all that. That's all a result of a system that's based on infinite growth, and also the fact that because it's a system that through the political system, companies can gain power and leverage for themselves, because again, everything's up for sale. So is legislation up for sale. So because of that, corporations that have been around for a long time, it's called institutional self-preservation. So corporations that have been around for a long time, like oil companies, they're going to do their best to make as much money as they can before they let any space for renewable energy to come in there. So they've already done their damage. They've already done their ravaging of the planet, you know? But that's because of our lack of us to understand market economics as a structurally failed system, not like, oh, it's that company's fault, you know? No. So just as a general introduction, that's really what structuralism is, you know? And structuralist perspective is the way to really properly diagnose, analyze, and then provide a solution to our world's problems.
So I have a question for you too, in regards to structuralism. You know, in the context of moneyless society, resource-based economy, all that, we talk about systems thinking a lot, right? It seems to me like structuralism is essentially kind of another way to say systems thinking, or a way to look through that lens, essentially. Am I off the mark there? Is there kind of a difference between structuralism and systems thinking, or when you say the two things, are you kind of talking about one and the same thing there for the most part?
So yeah, language is a very complex thing, and it can be often a barrier, but we try to create labels that are the easiest to make associations with, and to be able to transmit information easier.
Right, and I think also just kind of learning about systems thinking in general is kind of a large step for a lot of people in this process too. That one leap in general, I think, can open a lot of doors for people just to start to see the way all these different systems interact with each other, and how, like you were saying, Arjing, earlier, like we're not isolated, nothing is in a vacuum, right? All these different institutions and organizations and throughout society, they all interact with each other in so many different ways that, it's really hard to comprehend or even try to list out all the different interactions and relationships that they have. In systems theory, I've heard a lot about Donella Meadows in particular, and the leverage points, right? That you can intervene in a system, places to intervene in a system of, greater and greater leverage. They start out with just like manipulating numbers within the system, like increasing taxes or, giving more money to poor people and things like that. Then you start manipulating things that have greater effects over larger areas, and more essentially like one change can create changes across multiple areas just by having that one root change, and that's the way I view the monetary system, right? We're taking the purpose of the system from exponential growth or just, individual organizational domination of the world, which essentially I think is what most corporations' goal is, just to get as large as they can and keep increasing their market share. And so the goal is to go and change that leverage point, to change that purpose of the system to an intentional goal, like One Community Global's standard of the highest good of all, for instance, right? That's an intentional, sustainable goal that kind of
actually previously extinct. It can cascade over.
Right? That's an intentional, sustainable goal that kind of encompasses all these other sorts of things.
When you make a significant change in one area, it can cascade over to several other unexpected areas. So we see that actually happen in nature. Like, it's called a trophic cascade, I think, where the keystone species, its introduction to an area where it was actually previously extinct, makes a dramatic impact on all the parts of that ecosystem. So like, for example, with the wolves, I think it was in Yellowstone, they reintroduced the wolves. The absence of the wolves caused the drying of the river because all the herbivores ate all the grass, and the grass kept the banks together. And because of the desertification of the vegetation, the banks kind of caved in, and the river died. When the wolves came back, everything changed. Basically, long story short, you can see the same thing in economics and human society, in that localized food production, big major economic transition step. Instead of shipping avocados from Mexico, you can grow it right here in California, or even in New York. Hydroponic vertical farm systems using their own energy. You do that, well, what happens? Not only are you preserve environmental, you don't waste energy, you don't destroy the environment, you also dramatically reduce inequality, because the very mechanisms of globalization, of trading things all over the world, which is completely unnecessary, that only happens because of the pursuit of profit. And what does that do over long term? It only scalps more money to the top of the pyramid and makes other people impoverished, because the only reason you're shipping things all over the world is because labor costs are cheaper overseas. So they're exploiting cheap labor, they're exploiting cheap land at the cost of the environment, at the cost of human dignity, for just profits. So you dramatically make several changes to society. Human awareness of the local surroundings, of the local towns, they know where their food's coming from, dramatic reduction of inequality, dramatic increase of environmental sustainability, many things, but localization would be a big one of them.
So throughout this conversation so far, I've picked up on hints of things that we learn as regional coordinators and supporters of the Venus Project. It's most interesting to me when it comes to structuralism and the impact it's had on society, as Marlo said, down to the bone, is even as we're all pursuing this post-scarcity protopia, we're still somewhat polarized. And you being affiliated with Peter Joseph's movement and so familiar with the Venus Project's movement as well,
Deep ties.
how do you view your own position there, and how do you think structuralism has played a part in
the labels? That's the beginning of the civilized age, as far as I see it, where there's no such thing as the preservation of vested interests, so that's the really main thing of it. And just like Peter, I'm a person too. We're just trying to make change in the world. It's just good to stick with a way of thinking instead of any association to labels or groupisms. So we want to get away from any kind of sense of tribalism and include everybody, hopefully one day, in a unified value system, everybody together. That's it. Just it's a train of thought. It really comes down to a way of thinking in the end. And that's the unfortunate truth with the 99% of, unfortunately, I think 99% of activism out there, all these different groups, they're all trying to achieve particular goals, but they're not trying to achieve the overall goal of establishing a society that actually runs on emergent thinking. So they're not trying to do that, unfortunately, all of them. They're not engaged. They're not understanding that really comes down to how you think first, not just taking action against some oil company. But the biggest thing you can liberate yourself from is changing the way you think. That's why my channel is called A New Train of Thought.
Well, I mean, that really brings up the point of identity, and that gets into this internalization, the way that we internalize the structures of the system, that it's baked into us, that we are units within this thing creating itself. We need to stop identifying with the labels of this system. We need to stop identifying with our job. The whole Fight Club rant. You're not your job. You're not your consumer choices. You're not the things that you eat. You're not your clothing. You're not and deeper than that. You're not your idea structures. I mean,
God damn it, an entire generation pumping gas, waiting tables, slaves with white collars. Advertising has us chasing cars and clothes, working jobs we hate so we can buy shit we don't need. We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no Great War, no Great Depression. Our Great War is a spiritual war. Our Great Depression.
I'm a Christian, I'm a Marxist-Leninist, I'm a vegan, and these are ultimately consumer choices. It's like even a lot of the leftists I know, that a lot of anarchists I know, and communists, whatever their label is, it's an identity. It's a sort of spiritual fashion statement.
Every label association eventually becomes its own form of ideological imprisonment, because you eventually will hit a roadblock where things need to change and keep moving, and you're like, you know what? No, let's keep things the way they are, because I have an establishment now. I have a following now for this thing that I'm doing. It's become big now. I can't let it go. That's what establishment thinking does, and we want to be emergent. That's why it's like, man, how do I live my life? How do people live their lives when you know the things you know about the world? It goes, being good in a lot of ways just goes against the market ethic in this world. So that's why it's like, yeah, but we got to walk a fine line in life. So.
Emergent thinking. Can you expound upon exactly what emergent thinking is and the concept of emergence? I'm kind of familiar with it. I could probably give it a go myself, but I'm always curious to hear other people's take on it and how they kind of explain that concept.
It's just the acceptance that everything changes over time and that you can't hold something back in a static state. So, for example, look at LA, for example. For a 21st century city, to have people stuck in traffic for hours a day trying to go from one place to another when they should have like been there like in 5 minutes, but stuck in traffic for 2 hours. That's an example of the fact that our society is running on establishments. They're not really running fluidly, under change constantly. It should have been updated a long time ago, completely transformed. There should be no traffic on the streets. There should be nothing, no wait time. So that's just an example,
An organization called ET3, which has connections with the Venus Project, has established a tube-based maglev that can travel up to 4,000 miles per hour in a motionless, frictionless tube, which can go over land or underwater. Imagine going from LA to New York for an extended lunch break, or from Washington, D.C. to Beijing, China in 2 hours. This is the future of continental and intercontinental travel, fast, clean, with only a fraction of the energy usage we use today for the same means. In fact, between maglev technology, advanced battery storage, and geothermal energy, there would be no reason to ever burn fossil fuels again. And we can do this now if we were not held back by the paralyzing profit structure.
From medicine to agriculture to food production to manufacturing, everything, to our school systems, to the way we behave. For example, people are like, oh, competition is natural for people to be competing. You can't fight that. They don't understand. They don't really understand how established our way of thinking is in terms of even the way we treat each other. Like, we have all competitive sports. We have no cooperative sports. That's a sign that we're not emergent as a society. Because if modern research shows that competition creates hostility, inferiority, class antagonism, in every level, then you'd be like, okay, let's accept the new information. Time to change everything. No more no more stupid games of people competing with each other. All this attention, all this money being paid of these two people, idiots, punching each other in the face when we should be using that same money and energy to solve problems, So that's just an example, I can go on for days about that, but emergent, that's basically emergent thinking applied to society.
It doesn't have the feedback that it needs from the system, and it doesn't update itself fast enough, essentially. Like the capitalist mechanism for profit and all these things hold back that emergent aspect. I would tend to say something like that. You think that would kind of be correct?
I mean, it's a monstrously inefficient system that is, that's what it touts its successes as, that it's able to churn out 10,000 pieces of garbage made out of oil that are just going to end up back in the ocean. It's like, it's not efficient. Fundamentally, it's not able to get people to work on time. It's not able to keep the trains on time. And that's the whole kind of corporate fascist gambit, that they're efficient at what they do. They're efficient at ruthlessly taking people out in a competitive environment, but they're not efficient at meeting human needs. And I think one of the big aspects of competition that really just limits us so much is the stress that it creates, is that it's a monstrous detractor to public health, that it eats our bodies alive. I mean, the amount of sickness that is generated just by stress, by our bodies, it's like we're in this arbitrary construct of money. We're not in a life or death survival situation where we're, hunting a deadly animal in the woods or being hunted or at war, yet we feel like we're at war all the time because we're being waged war on by this construct of money, that if we don't have money, we will die. It is a sheer survival mechanism for us to acquire currency. And so all these crazy abstractions are generated out of that. And I think once you see that it's not individual people, it's not individual failure, it's because that's all individualism, which is the side effect of the system. It's not all an individual failing you. When somebody cuts you off on traffic, it's like, oh, that individual person fucked me over. It's like, no, that person is in a completely alien, stressful, arbitrary construct of traffic that shouldn't exist. That person shouldn't have been an asshole to you in the first place. They were put into an unnatural circumstance that made them that way. So starting to see people that way, it completely transforms morality. It takes judgment, so much judgment out of the equation.
Like what somebody from the Zeitgeist movement called rational benevolence. So morality has to be tied to some kind of physical referent. It can't just be something you just throw out there loosely. And modern research on anthropology and human behavior, these things have shown us a blueprint kind of how you can actually create the right kind of environment so that people do not become a victim of their own circumstance, like what's happening today with you're talking about before about the ways the system hurts people. Well, there's many different levels that it hurts people. We're just constantly poisoning ourselves with the wrong kind of social environment, which is based on hierarchy, dominance, and fighting, tribalism. So political parties against political party, everyone's fighting each other. So There's no unity.
And you mentioned how we are being poisoned essentially by the system, and that was mentioned earlier in this episode too. And knowing that you're a fitness and health venturist, how important would you say, how would you articulate how important it is to be able to maintain physical and mental well-being to survive in the system, and also how this system directly affects our mental and physical well-being? How do you see that manifested in your line of work particularly?
I mean, it's good to maintain physical fitness in this world, but, you know, I train a lot of people who have become physically fit, but their value system is very distorted. So I think the basis for health and fitness starts with how you think about the world. It has to start from there, because you cannot be just completely on a conscious level detached from reality and what's really going on, you know? Yeah, so on that level, I feel like fitness is multivariate and is very comprehensive, and there's many layers to it. So people who can be very fit, you know, the whole fitness buzz, all the whole world, Instagram people, Instagram models, they're all very sick people. Their value systems are very distorted and outdated, and they're basically damaging themselves and their children and everybody around them over time. They're just polluting themselves with false, destructive ideologies and valuing nonsense, you know, valuing the most arbitrary, immature, childish crap. And there's a market for fitness, I guess, whatever. In any kind of functional society, nobody would need a personal trainer. They would know how to take care of themselves. So my job would be completely obsolete in the future, and it should be obsolete, you know, in the future. So,
right.
Yeah, and something to add on to that too, I think,
agree more.
is kind of structural, you know, systemic flaws of the community that have changed for life.
Quality of life doesn't have food.
Of going, and again,
money is not an advancement. It's not a civilizing agent. It's a degradation of social order. It's a degradation and a regression from our true nature. As Prentice, a fellow guest, said, it's a spiritual warfare. It's a war of ideas. It's a war for the soul of who we are. And we are not competitive. We are not inherently monstrous, you know, cannibalistic, all-devouring, senseless, irrational beings that would destroy their own earth to make a penny. We are cooperative, and I think we can't beat we can't beat these competitive people in a competitive construct. In their game, with their rules, with their falsehoods, we can't win. But we can completely transcend their game with a new game that we can participate in this life. We can create it. And to truly redesign this society is to make rationality, education, free thought, actualization the core principle of our society. Like, that is what the purpose of society is. It's not to generate profit, to create jobs for all these silly, absurd externalities, these false prosthetic limbs that are, you know, carrying the weight of our whole world. It's to be people. It's to be together. It's to figure out who we are and to figure out our strengths and our weaknesses and work together to make something better.
Right, yes, you've got to use your intellectual faculties, your empathetic faculties. Stop feeding into the narratives that polarize people, and just come together and move forward so that we can finally build this egalitarian society that will sustain us in the world.
RJ, you got some closing remarks to go down swinging?
Look, things are not pretty right now. Things are not heading in the right direction. We have a lot of environmental and social crises that are on the horizon, but we have to understand that the real battle is one of values. The real war comes down to informing our fellow man and woman with the right knowledge so that the manipulation tactics of the establishment are simply not going to work anymore. We need to be pushing for systemic kindness, which means really advocating for a society that takes into consideration everyone's needs as well as respecting natural limits, and that can only be achieved through an educated population. So our goal should be really to reach a critical mass and have a sense of compassion even for our oppressors, because really when it comes down to it, we're not fighting against anyone or any government or any corporation. The real battle comes down to reflecting our own values and looking into ourselves to see how far we have to go in terms of our awareness and how we can strategize in ways to educate other people. An educated population, really, as Jacques Fresco used to put it,
an educated population needs no control.
With that said, I wish everyone the best of luck, and let's keep fighting. Let's keep presenting an alternative vision of the future that makes the existing power establishment obsolete.
I'd like to thank RJ for coming on the show today. He's become a great personal friend and collaborator. We are working together on a totally cutting edge film that's breaking down a lot of this information and condensing it into a really stylish